Well, that was correct, $5 a month. It got raised to $15 in November of that year. Very first missionary to visit Bible Baptist Church. Anybody want to guess who that might have been?
Do we still support them?
We still support them. No, a good guess. Rex. And they were going to Colombia at the time, and then the Colombian government lost all their paperwork. How convenient. And so get the I didn't touch anything.
Lost it just like that.
So they decided that while they were waiting, they would go to work in Mexico, and that's where they ended up staying in Mexico because the Colombian government never did. First single lady to visit our church.
First single lady missionary?
Huh?
First single lady missionary?
Is this a mission test? I think I just heard them call for you down the nursery. Does anybody know?
Single or widowed?
Single. Vera's daughter. She was with Child Evangelism Fellowship. Okay, let's try it again. First Faith Promise Conference, March 29th through the 30th, 1980. That's just information, okay? Bob Ford came up for the first 4, I think it was, mission conferences. And we raised $2,581.80. I didn't put it up on the board, but the faith promise this morning was forget what it was, $50-some thousand. We were about $2,000 less, but I just got a faith promise card, so that'll bring up that total, so I'll have that for you next week. Okay, so thank you, all 12 of you who took part in the faith missions. Tim Searles was here. You don't remember him. He was going to Thailand, and he did go to Thailand, but did he come home?
I think so.
Are they still there? Okay. Dan Green was in Nova Scotia. He's no longer there as a missionary. And we had no theme for the first 4 conferences. First title conference was March 29th, through April 9th. And it was in 1984. And when we started this thing out, we started out with just Saturday and Sunday. And people kept coming to me, "Preacher, can we go another day back?" And I said, okay. So we started on Friday, and then they'd come to me and say, "We want to be longer." So we got the thing up to Tuesday before it ran its course. But the people were excited about Faith Promise and having the missionaries here. The first title was Go, Pray, Give, Matthew 28:9, 9:28, and Luke 6:38. I think we had that verse in this morning, didn't we? And Faith Promise was $11,237 that year. What you don't realize is how big the church was. Ricardo Nerio in the Philippines, Lee Wydant, Philippines, Frank Poling, U.S. Straits. Some of you might remember Frank Poling in the picture he put up on the screen. The garbage can with all the parts in it. Obviously, we didn't take him on for sport. And Richard Sora was in Peru, and didn't he get sick or something? He had to come home. And then Billy Delaney, Ireland. And none of those that I, except maybe Sora, none of those I don't think. Billy is, I don't know if he's doing missionary work or not. Do you know? Okay, so we have, none of those missionaries are on the field anymore. How much do you believe Bible Baptist Total Faith Promise was for the first 17 years? Just, I know, I realize that's a random figure, but how much? Well, thank you for the confidence.
First 17 years?
First 17 years. How much? $40,000. $70,000. Do I hear 190,000? The first 17 years, that's what we promised by faith promise. In what year did we officially call this meeting Missions Conference? 1982, 1980, or 1977? Remember what I told you, the first 4 years we were here, we had Missions Conference, but we didn't call it that? You remember what year I told you there was the first Missions Conference? 1982. You must have been born then. I'm going to change the date. Okay, that's it, Joe. All right, I just wanted to do that. I thought maybe I'd just hurriedly put that together before I come to church tonight, just to let you see what your church has done over the years. There's a lot of other stuff, but missions was the heart of what we've done ever since we've been here. We were a mission church, so to speak, and we're helped for 5 years by somebody, and Dwayne Rutherford, and his church pastored. As a matter of fact, just for your information, we put the church on payments for 5 years. I think it was $25 or $30 a month or something. And you say that ain't much. It was when I was first got here. And Brother Rutherford said they would make the payments for us until we were able. And it was our first 5 years before we were able. We made the last payment. He made all the other ones. So what you have here is the blessing of God that somebody cared enough to take it on and for support. We appreciate that. I've asked Sister Pam if she would give a testimony, and so she's going to come and do that.
That's why some people get nervous watching a single lady walk up with a Bible in her hand. So I take my iPad up just in case. But he asked me to share my testimony and then the verse that kind of led me into missions. And so, as some of you guys heard on Tuesday or on Thursday, I got saved at the age of 5. I grew up in a Christian family. We were in church basically anytime the doors were open. And one Wednesday night at Awana's, I can remember clearly exactly where I was sitting in the room and hearing about and understanding about sin and hell for the first time. But I also remember very clearly that I was only 5 years old and a Sparks and new to within like 2 to 3 months of Awana Club in Sparks. And those adults terrified me. And so as much as I was scared of hell, I was scared of those adults too. And so I wasn't willing to go forward then. But when I got home that night, I'd asked my dad about it. And I can remember clearly kneeling next to my bed that night with him and him leading me to Christ. And so, again, as I had said on Thursday, having my Bible, having that book, and having that connection to God was precious to me. When I was 8, my family had stopped going to church because my mom had gone into mental hospitals. And here and there on a Wednesday night, some family friends would come and pick up some of us. I was, at the time, I was the oldest of 5. And so some family friends would come and pick up myself and maybe one of my other siblings and take us to Awana's once a month, once every 2 months, maybe for an Awana Grand Prix or an Awana Olympics. But for the most part, from the age of 8 until the age of 14, my exposure to church was 1 week of Bible. My exposure to Christianity in church was 1 week of Bible camp during the summer, and then maybe about 8 or 9 times on Wednesday nights throughout the school year. But I still craved it and still loved it. When I was 14, you know how parents will give their kids the limit as to where they can go. Oh, well, you can go to the end of the driveway, but no further when you're playing outside. You can go to the end of the street, but no further. And of course, back in the 80s, in 90s, it was a bit more lax than it is today. But I remember the day that my dad had said, okay, you can go to the Kroger. Now you have to understand, the Kroger was a mile down the road and then back through the woods over a mountain. And then the Kroger, you come down behind the mountain, behind the Kroger down the mountain. And it was about, at the time, that was a little over 1.5 miles away. I was 14 years old, and I looked at my dad and I was like, please, any chance at the stoplight you would let me cross the 4-lane highway? And he said yes, and across the street was my church. And so from that point on Sunday nights and Wednesday nights, I started walking. And I would walk the 1.5 miles to go get to church, and then after church I'd walk the 1.5 miles home. And because I was in West Virginia, and it was on the other side of a mountain, I hated coats. I would wear like 2 or 3 sweaters. I can literally say I walked to church uphill both ways without a coat in the middle of the winter. And so it's so much fun because I can say that and have it be true. Because I'd have to go uphill one way and uphill the other. But it was special to me because I had to work for it. I had to, if I was going to have it, I had to work for it. When I was 15, my mom had passed away, and at that point, my family started coming to church on Sunday mornings. And so at least on Sunday mornings, I would get a ride, but I was still walking on Sunday nights and on Wednesday nights. And then at 18, I moved to Michigan. And when I graduated, I went to Providence Baptist College in Elgin, Illinois. I was there for 3.5 years, finished, came back and started working a job as an accountant, but also the accountant, some of you guys know Pat Bolton, as he always says, the accounting was the job I used to support my church habit. And he uses insurance was what he used to support his church habit. So I was working my job as an accountant, but then also volunteering 40 to 50 hours a week at church. And it went on for years. For about 3 or 4 years, I worked as an accountant. Ended up going to Kobiak and working on full-time staff for 3 years there. And then came back and was working got sick, came back, was working again as an accountant. But again, that was to support the 40 or 50 hours a week I was working at Midland Baptist Church. And around that point, in 2015, I was starting to study specifically the different gifts that God had given people throughout the Bible. And then I was also specifically studying the people through the Bible and what they did in ministry, or what God chose to call attention to about their ministry. And I can't tell you, there was no lightning bolt moment, anything like that, I can't say that. But somewhere through doing all that, I had recognized that while I was using a lot of the talents and skills God had given me for organizing events, running events, for organizing the office, doing a calendar, a lot of the logistics things, I wasn't using my burden for kids who didn't know if they were wanted and kids who didn't have a chance to get to church. I had been on the bus routes for a while, but due to vestibular migraines, I was no longer able to handle the motion of the bus route, and I wasn't able to work out on the bus routes anymore. And so at some point throughout that study, I'd come to the conclusion, well, in Midland, I'm not finding this group of people. And God has given me such a desire to work with this group of people. So I would say God didn't necessarily call me to a place, but he said, this is the passion that I've given you, go find where you can do it. And so I was talking with my pastor, talking with the youth pastor, and we were talking about different places where we could do that. I'd been looking at some friends who are missionaries in Tanzania and a couple other places, and then I sat down with Mark Simpson, the youth assistant pastor at my church, and he said, well, if you go anywhere, I want you to go where Mike is. He said, because then I can keep an eye on you. Because our church went down to where Mike Kennedy was a missionary in Peru every 2 years on a missions trip. And Mike Kennedy had been his best friend through college. And so I was like, well, okay, I'll talk to Mike. And we found out like a week later at that point, Mike and his family were coming off for their first extended furlough so that their oldest son could spend his senior year of high school in a U.S. school, and then their second oldest son could spend his senior year of high school in a U.S. school, which meant they were going to be in the U.S. for 2 years, and they were stationing at Midland Baptist, and they were going to be living in Midland. And so I got to spend some extended time with them, and I had a conversation with Mike and Shalene, and I had said, well, I'm interested in coming to work in Peru with you guys. And throughout the conversation, we're not really sure what happened. We're not sure if they thought I was much younger than I actually am, or because I do look it, but or we're not really sure. But he started giving me all of the rules and regulations that they give their interns who were high school or like first, second, third year college. Now I was 34 or 32 at the time. And so he was saying, well, you're not allowed to leave the the orphanage property by yourself. You're not ever allowed to date anybody, any national. You're not ever allowed to. And he was going through several different things, and I'm like, I'm not 12 years old. I'm not 17 years old. I'm not sure that I'm willing to do this. And I'm not sure I'm willing to put myself under those rules. And because it was a safer area. And so I had ended up telling them no. But then that year, and so that was probably February, and in May, our church had a missions conference, and the theme that year was from 2 Corinthians 8, verse 3. And the verse says, "For to their power I bear record, yea, and beyond their power they were willing of themselves." But they had taken parts of that verse and given it a theme. And I can remember clearly, and what I saw was there was one big word here, and then it said, to their power and beyond their power. And I had created the missions books. I had done kids packets for the kids and done stuff to get ready for this missions conference. And I can remember Mike Kennedy was preaching that conference. And the Thursday of that conference, I sat there, and the entire sermon, they had like the slide with the theme up on the wall on their projector. And the entire sermon, I didn't hear a word he said. All I saw was the entire theme. Because as much as the theme was to their power and beyond their power, the first word of that theme was actually willing, to their power and beyond their power. And I somehow, in all the work that I had done, I had been reading to their power and beyond their power the whole time and missed the word willing. And I was like, all right, well, and all I can remember thinking is, I'm willing to go if you want me to. So if you're really wanting me to live in such a way that I'm not allowed to leave the orphanage without an escort, not even to go to the market, and if I'm not ever allowed to do this or this or this, okay, I'm willing to. I don't want to, but I'm willing to. And at some point in the next week or two, I'd sat down with Mike, and he's like, I told you all that? I would never have said that. And his wife's like, well, you did. But in any case, when I started developing materials the next week, and I started deputation September of 2015. I was working my job for about 7 months as an accountant and traveling on the weekends. And then I was here in March of 2016, and so then it would have been April or May of 2016 I went on deputation full time. And then I ended up on the field April 16th of 2017. So I've been there, we're coming up on 6 years, and that's my story. So it was 2 Corinthians 8:3, for to their power I bear record, yea, and beyond their power they were willing of themselves.
I've heard a lot of testimonies from this pulpit over the years, and I can't say that I ever heard one that was boring. Most of them, I wondered if she would say she's from West Virginia when she said she had to go up the hill and down the hill, and I'm thinking, people are thinking, where in Michigan do you have to do that? UP. But she's from Virginia, West Virginia or Virginia? West Virginia, all right. And amazing, isn't it, that the Lord would take somebody from West Virginia, bring them all the way to Michigan, and then call them to Peru. So I appreciate her coming. I know she hurt her leg here the other night, so she's mending on that. Y'all pray for her on that. Brother, glad to have you and your family with us here. And I don't see any reason why we probably can't take your family on. Okay, unless you guys don't want to. Everybody in favor? Amen. Everybody not in favor? Your son. Yeah. Well, I think he cancels all the good ones, so. All right, so they'll probably ask you for some information on your family before you all take off, so. All right. Brother, close us in prayer.